Cole, thank you so much for coming. I'm so excited to have this opportunity to talk to you today. I was hoping you might share for the audience a little bit about your background, how you came to found listeners on call, and why, what
Sure,
drove you.
absolutely. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. So thank you. I'm Cole Egger, CEO and co-founder of Listeners on Call. We are a platform that provides human connection based around shared experiences. My own personal experience is a journey that started for me 5 years ago with a personal experience of my father who'd been diagnosed with a blood cancer, and I ultimately wound up being the stem cell donor from my father. That weighed very heavily on me, the idea that if my stem cells didn't work, my father wasn't going to make it, which is ultimately and unfortunately what happened about a month ago after a 5 year battle with cancer. But at the same time, 5 years ago, I was also going through a pretty rocky divorce. And so for the first time in my life, I found myself in a situation that I was really unequipped to handle, and found myself in a very alone place in life and trying to understand what really was the next step for me and where to go. So, Listeners on Call was a platform that was created from that own personal experience. What about you, Gail? What have you been up to lately?
So, my background is an investor into early stage companies such as yourself and others in B2B. I also work on platforms to help them grow. Ultimately, working with individuals, teams, and organizations focused on marketing and revenue acceleration. And part of my program, Growthing, is focused on what do you want to achieve in life? What is your purpose? And how do you live a purposeful life? And so, after going through a divorce and struggling with some bouts of loneliness, I decided that I wanted to research launching a new business, which is growing today, and figure out how to solve a systemic issue that's happening, which is loneliness and social isolation. As part of something giving back to the universe, of thinking through how do I solve this for my children, because loneliness and social isolation hits kids 25 and below. And if I was going to do something purposeful in life, I was going to figure out how to solve a big problem. And this is a problem I decided to focus on. So 3 years ago, I went out and put this on my vision of if I could achieve anything, this is something I would look to achieve. And I did it in ways that I can bring value, which working with early stage companies focused on this issue, writing a book to help individuals understand and articulate and activate their unique value, and soon to be launching communities around growthing, which is helping individuals to expand themselves and inspire action for them to live a purposeful life.
Wow, that's pretty amazing that you've been able to venture down that path and have that journey. We talk a lot today about, and you hear, I feel mainstream media uses it when we're not talking about COVID. We're talking about the epidemic of loneliness and mental health today. And so, what does that really mean to you when we talk about the epidemic of loneliness and where we are today as a society?
It means a lot of different things. Obviously, pre COVID and post COVID discussions, pre COVID, social isolation and loneliness. I mean, ultimately, it's an emotional feeling, how somebody feels. It happens around a social disconnect, a divorce, a death, anything that shifts somebody in a way that even though they may have people around them, ultimately they feel internally a sense of disconnection. In my eyes, that comes from digital tools, it comes from social change, it comes from some sort of transformation that happens to someone emotionally. And it happens pre COVID, it was happening to people 68 plus for a variety of different reasons, mainly because not having community available to them in the same way they did in the earlier years, not having family close and or family at all, and or being in environments where community environments. So it enables them to feel meaning in life. If you think about it for children, children have social isolation because of phones, yes, but also because they're not being taught how to interact with other children in school. So I know that sounds strange, but times have changed and schools haven't changed with the times. So if a child is not in group sports and she's an artist and she's an introvert and she spends time with animals, she is going to go internally and miss the opportunity to connect externally. And since the environments that we live on and in are focused on you as a human and then your interactions with others, well, kids haven't been taught interaction. At 10 years old, at 6 years old, they're being taught to go on digital devices. And its addiction to digital devices is because of a lot of the legislation that wasn't pushed to protect children. So I've spent the last 25 years in digital as part of thinking through how to grow platforms. I didn't realize I'd be hurting my children at the same time. So as I think through how do I help children, the first thing is how do you teach them how to be socially engaged? How do you give them the right tools to interact? And how do you teach them that it's okay to be asking questions and putting themselves out there to get what they want?
Yeah, it's been very interesting right in this time of COVID, and that we've added this whole new layer of challenges, if you will, with regards to social isolation. I know I have a nephew who's 8 years old, and for months now, fortunately now they're starting to have more interaction and engagement with different sporting events for kids. But for several months, the only engagement that my nephew saw with his friends was through playing Madden on Xbox. And I think to myself, how challenging that is, and the added layer of disconnection, if you will, from human connection that has caused because of COVID and where we're at today. And so I'm just curious if you see that having a long lasting impact given what's happened today.
1,000% plus. Um, Now, please understand that the Surgeon General of the United States during Barack Obama's time, Vivek, he was the first one to identify how big social isolation was. And he looked at it from a level of somebody smoking 15 cigarettes a day. That health concern is real. Why do you say that social isolation and smoking 15 cigarettes a day is similar? Because as humans, we need to have meaning. Meaning comes from engagement. It comes from purpose. It comes from not only having value, but giving your value to others. So the fundamental human need is missing: connection, meaning. So when we think about how big of an issue this is, the good news is there's more attention to it. The bad news is it doesn't, the problems and the ways to solve social isolation, it is, there's a lot of work to be done because it's only accessible to the wealthy. Main reason why is if you think about therapy, environments of community, there's a cost to do that. The cost for me to go take a soul cycle class is $50 a class. Well, guess what? Not everyone has that money to spend to find connection or find their connection. What we're missing is the ability to serve all markets, to create connection in a new way, socially distanced. But now, since the market is so much bigger, the health risk is tremendously bigger, right? But it's a great opportunity to solve, which to me is the most exciting, is how do I solve a very systemic problem that we have that was only touching youth and the elderly. Now it's touching almost all humans globally. So when you think about how to solve an issue like this, you go to tech. Okay, well, I've got my phone. I've got communities on Zoom. I've got emotional needs that need to be fulfilled. But again, guess what? A lot of that comes from people that have computers, people that have that kind of access. Take the veterans, today's Veterans Day. Do they have that kind of access? Do they have computers? Do they have a laptop like this to play their Zoom? No. They may have, smartphones, but we need something that is accessible for all. We need to solve a big problem. And when you have healthcare, you still, for therapy, you still have to pay $250 out of pocket and then get reimbursed only a percentage. It's not effective to solve this big problem. And then I've got a family of four. When I got divorced, I had to send my daughter, myself, and me to therapy. We all each had our own therapist to talk to. And then we came together as a group. It cost me over $10,000 in therapy. That is not doable for the average human. So creating and solving this problem has to be something that's accessible for anybody that has a smartphone. It has to be cost efficient, time efficient, and available. So that being said, Cole, not to set you up, but tell me about how you see solving this problem. How do you create an environment that we have hundreds of millions of people that are suffering? How do we create an environment that helps us be connected?
Sure. No, I appreciate the perspective there. I think, my personal opinion, and I think our mission with listeners on call is that the only way that you ever truly solve loneliness is by interjecting more human connection. I oftentimes get asked about AI, I get asked about chatbots, and I certainly think that they're can help support part of the solution, be part of the equation. But ultimately, I think to truly bridge that gap of loneliness, leveraging technology today, you have to interject human connection, have human interaction in order to bridge that gap. With listeners on call, our focus today is really around removing four of the key barriers, all of which you mentioned there, to what today is 205 million Americans statistically who believe they do not have access to support in a time of need when they're feeling lonely or sad or depressed. And those barriers are cost, convenience, compatibility, and stigma. And so we spoke to cost, certainly convenience as it comes down to access, stigma, depending on cultural or religious barriers that could come into play there. And then compatibility. We believe compatibility is one of the strongest aspects of human connection. So the understanding, even if you do have access, even if you do have the funding and the ability to afford to go see a therapist, just as I did in my own personal experience with my father and my struggles that I dealt with 5 years ago, that by no means guarantees that the individual that you're having the conversation with has ever walked in your shoes, has any understanding or perspective of what it is that you are either going through or have been through. I'm sure they can share strategies and tactics on how to deal with situations that you might be facing. But that ultimately wasn't something that worked for me because what I felt like I needed and ultimately found, not in a licensed therapist, but in a listener, I found someone who had actually walked in my same shoes, who had actually been a stem cell donor, who had unfortunately herself gone through a divorce, but wound up being the best listener that I had ever met and greatly impacted and changed my life in a time where I'd kind of hit rock bottom, to be honest with you. And that really kind of turned my life around at that point in time and really impressed upon me the power of human connection based around compatibility and what that could mean. And so I think that the only way that we ever truly make a difference is bridged around human connection. I think we have the opportunity to leverage technology. I think oftentimes today the irony of it all is that we have more technology and means of connection than we ever have in the history of our society. Yet statistically, we are the loneliest that we have ever been. 73% of adults self-identify as being lonely on an annual basis. I think that we have the opportunity to bridge that gap of disconnection and leverage technology to provide more human connection to individuals through a smartphone, as you brought up earlier, right? We don't need a computer to even be able to do that today. We can leverage that through even if something as simple as a smartphone from home. And so that's really what we're focused on.
So, what do you believe is the role of an organization in this? So, I'm just curious. Yes, I have my personal needs, but I look at the companies I sit on the board for, and one of them is a company, Tenuity, another one, Merit Direct, and 700 plus people for Tenuity. We'll take them as an example. Youth minded, performance driven, and everybody works remote almost. They did have offices, but they definitely were open to people working remote. And what is the accountability of a corporation to give not only healthcare, but give the support that they need to their employees, or colleges giving counseling to their students, or the government giving support to their veterans, talking about Veterans Day, or what is that role? Because I know for organizations, Tenuity is the number one place to work. And inside of that environment, we always are thinking about mental health for our employees. But knowing that the costs of mental health are so expensive, even if they took it on for themselves, I mean, what is the role between individual, knowing I have a problem, getting access, and or access to it? Is there anything you can share based on your experience and the conversations you're having?
Sure. Yeah, no, I think organizations, corporations have a significant role to play in the mental health and well-being of their employees, especially in the world that we live in today. Because of this and a lot of the conversations that we've had, we've actually launched an entire program called our Perks program, which is personal conversations for employees in response to the demand that we were seeing. The reality today, when I have conversations with HR managers, is that at the end of the day, the employees, they're not dealing with the typical struggles that they might have seen when they were coming into the office. It's not the same conversations that they're having today. HR managers share with me that their employees are lonely, that they feel isolated. They're struggling around conversations on race relations. Most of your corporations today, especially your larger organizations, all have checked the box of having your traditional EAP in place, but there's oftentimes a significant amount of stigma that's associated with your EAPs. They're significantly underutilized, on average between 2 and 5%, and oftentimes seen as only a place where you go in a situation of a medical crisis. But again, that's not the challenge that employees are facing today. Employees have lost that sense of morale, that sense of camaraderie that they had with their fellow employees when they were working in the office. Your traditional perks and benefits don't apply. You're not all congregating and mingling in the break room, so to speak. And so we're facing unprecedented realities today from the workforce. And so I think that employers and organizations have a significant role to play in managing and providing mental health and wellness resources for their employees. And so we've seen a tremendous uptick in our program with Perks in allowing employees to be able to connect with listeners on demand, 24/7, 365, to deal with topics and conversations that maybe they were having at work with a fellow employee, but today they don't have that opportunity. And employers are actually subsidizing the cost of those calls for those employees. So I think you'll continue to see more and more programs like this be put in place for employees today, because mental health was top of mind, and I would say one of the top topics in our country prior to COVID. And I certainly believe that it will be the number one topic on the other side of COVID, as COVID has really brought the conversation of mental health in the workplace to the forefront.
So I love that you're talking about mental health and bringing it to the forefront, but I do want to just kind of take a step back. The sector as a whole has gotten a lot of attention, not even a question. So we know that mental health services, there are companies that are large, kind of almost like insurance companies that manage mental health. And when I think about the taxing of time that to try to engage the consumer, to engage the employee, to sign up to this, it's not always adopted. And I think it's one of our biggest challenges is that even when people need mental health services, they're not always getting it. And you definitely brought forward how there is a stigmatism, there is a access challenge, but I think that there is a bigger issue that sits, which is the knowledge of just knowing that you can just pick up the phone and talk to someone. I feel like if it was, and I say this in the kindest way, like a 1-800 number that's just like solves an issue. And I'll give you an example. I remember when I was looking at this space, I was trying to find examples of where success has been. Because before we take an investment into anything, especially on the rebel side, we look at that. And the first thing I kept thinking about is 1-800 numbers. Where have they successfully implemented programs to stop an issue like loneliness? And actually, suicide prevention is a huge area where we saw incredible adoption of all of the different assets that they created to get people to consider other options before suicide. And I felt like it was one of the only programs I've ever seen actively. And if you look at the rates of suicide rates over time, have increased and decreased, right? People are using a lot more of the tools available, which is a 1-800 number, calling someone. There was an incredible song Khalid had created around the awareness of suicide and how prevalent it was. But I felt like they made a lot of, because the increase of suicide, they were able to get enough services to decrease the number of deaths. So that's the only time I've seen a solve like this. So can you talk to me about how do you manage people that are coming through your platform potentially suicidal and or and how you manage that? And then the second question is looking at suicide prevention and all of the actions they took to really systemically stop the issue, especially with youth. They, I would say, I don't have the stats. I would think that they've been successful, but just because the awareness level and the I saw it on Golden Gate Bridge how they had signs, call 1-800 suicide prevention. They always have someone there that's like you pick up the phone, someone's there for you.
On the reference around suicide prevention, I think that we certainly endorse and promote resources such as suicide prevention. We consider ourselves to fall in the middle of the spectrum. Certainly, understanding that on one end of the spectrum you have licensed therapy, and on the other end of the spectrum you have hotlines, just like suicide prevention that you're talking about now. I think that those are available resources that we offer within our platform. Those are resources that our listeners participate in and go through as part of our onboarding and education training process to handle those. But we always recommend that if someone's in a situation where they would need to talk about suicide or suicide prevention and have those types of conversations, that they would utilize those hotlines that have been specifically created for those types of topics. I think today what we really focus on is in our platform is exactly that. We oftentimes get coined the Uber of empathy. And so the idea that you could simply pick up your phone and find a number of different topics that you could connect, whether that's around loneliness or isolation. We do not actually have a topic on suicide. Again, we reference the suicide prevention hotline. The crisis hotline actually is the resource that we utilize to recommend to incoming callers should they need to talk to someone. But we really find ourselves as a place where you come to gain perspective or find a sounding board for conversations that you may need to have that you're dealing with, whether that is on divorce or isolation, as we mentioned. But we certainly endorse and promote those other resources out there today, like the suicide prevention hotline.
So, question for you, because I'm sure a lot of investors like myself think about this. What about, any of the HIPAA compliance and insurance around this? Like, how do you, I mean, do you have HIPAA compliance? Does it sit beneath it? How do you get insured for these types of um, potential opportunities or outcomes or whatever it might be? I think about that as with my investor hat on because we know that the bigger platforms they are falling under the HIPAA compliance, and then there are these broader opportunities that is there potential challenge getting insurance? Like, how do you manage that from your perspective?
Sure. Today, I would say we sit underneath that. And when you talk about these bigger platforms or clients out there today, those I assume that you would be referencing are those that are licensed therapists. Today, we do not allow licensed therapists on our platform in numerous different ways, including the terms of service, the independent contractor agreement, and about a dozen other locations in our platform. You have to sign off on that you are not providing medical or professional advice. We're a platform to serve as a positive sounding board and a listening ear for callers who are in need to talk to somebody. And that doesn't always mean that that's coming through the lens of needing support. We have individuals who frankly just need to call and talk about a job change, talk about if they're looking to move, what a listener thinks about that, and then gaining perspective on just simply different life experiences that we all go through today. So that's how we focus around that. And so I would say we sit below many of these other platforms that we are not a platform promoting professional or medical advice.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that because I do think it is important, as people are considering their safety, how they feel, their emotional vulnerability, and helping them understand that there's a place that's safe, that is warm, that is connected. Like that's the dream. I always say if I could have one place to go and hang out, I know it sounds crazy, but it would be like AA because nobody needs to know much about you. There's a process of change. It's an environment of sharing and caring, and it's helping people grow. So I am always the biggest champion of those kind of environments where it, people are helping you become their best selves. And that's what we all strive for to feel the connection and meaning. When I look at companies to invest in or people to invest in, I actually invest more into people that I believe that are doing what they were meant to do, that are purposeful, that are doing it because of, or knowing that they're doing something that is truly their value. I believe that that's how great leaders lead, as Simon Sinek would say. But it's not about what you say, it's about what you do that shows that. And looking at your platform and what you've achieved, Cole, number one, the platform for where you guys are and the opportunity you have in front of you and how you've scaled has been nothing but impressive to me. So congrats on that because it's not easy to have an idea, to take it to market, to activate it and accelerate it and solve a real need in the marketplace. Which leads me to my last question is these people that are listeners, I've always been so curious as to who are they? What's their background? What do they look like? Now, I know who the callers would be, but the listeners are these incredible people that take their time and they give it to others. So tell me a little bit about who these people are. What do they represent? Like, why are they giving themselves in this way? Obviously, yes, they have the opportunity to make money, but it's more than that. Like, if you're sitting there and you're listening to somebody's story, for me, I love to give to others, so it's easy. But tell me a little bit about these listeners because I find that to be so incredible that people are caring enough to do that.
Yeah, no, we've been very fortunate. It's very humbling the number of listeners that have come on the platform as quickly as they have. I would tell you, I agree. It's exactly just that. It's not only a sense of the opportunity to create income for yourself, but it's that true sense of altruism, right? The fact that I'm doing something good for others, exactly as you described there. So today, I would tell you that probably 95% of our listener foundation comes from individuals who have chosen a lifetime of empathy in their profession. So those are nurses, teachers, social workers, caregivers, and others who are frankly there to support and help others in a time of need. Now, that certainly doesn't mean that our platform is limited to only those professions. There's others, Gail, just like yourself, who are extremely empathetic, who have an amazing journey and experience to share that ultimately could truly impact and benefit to someone else who is going through a difficult time or challenge. And so, we encourage anyone for that matter who is looking to help and support others who believes that they have an experience that someone else may be going through to be able to share and open up. I think when we talk about how do we ever address loneliness or mental health at scale, it's going to be because that others are willing to open up and share. and also serve by helping others in a time of need. And I think that that's really the foundation and makeup of what our listener base is today. It's something that we will certainly continue to grow.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that's a great opportunity because it also gives them the opportunity to give, receive, and believe that the universe is bigger than this issue and that together globally we can look to solve a problem that will, I mean, based on what I can see, is going to be around for a while. So thank you so much, Cole, for taking the time and educating us here. I love being and learning and listening to all that you have to say, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, Gail, thank you. I appreciate it and appreciate the continued support for our mission with listeners on call.